There is a limestone fragment in the basement storage of the Cairo Museum that has not been publicly examined since 1973. It is catalogued as JE89289. It was pulled from a sealed subsidiary chamber beneath the Sahara necropolis in 1971 by a team working under Dr. Jean-Philippe Lauer, one of the most rigorous Egyptologists of the 20th century. The last scholar to formally examine it noted in her fieldwork documentation that the figures carved into its register had no equivalents in any dynastic text she had encountered across 20 years of professional work. That documentation exists. The fragment exists in a drawer. And what is carved into the stone, in a register that is not funerary and not devotional and matches no known category of Egyptian monumental text, is the record of a conversation. In that conversation, a human being asked a question of an authority over a specific domain of knowledge. The only thing the register records about what followed is the formal administrative outcome, not the question. The refusal. That refusal is not confined to one limestone block in one Egyptian basement. The same refusal, documented in different scripts across different centuries and different continents, appears in the oldest surviving Aramaic fragments of the Book of Enoch held at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. It appears in a Babylonian clay tablet buried 12 feet below the flood layer at Ur before 2900 BCE, a tablet with no accession number in any public museum collection. It appears in a 17-verse section of the Book of Job that is present in the oldest Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures but absent from the Masoretic text that underlies every modern Bible. 4 records. 4 traditions, 4 formal refusals, each produced by people who used the same format for this as they used for legal proceedings, administrative inventories, and architectural surveys. They were not writing mythology, they were filing a report. This is what those reports say. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the question Thoth refused to answer the complete glyph-by-glyph breakdown of the JE89289 register, the 3 petition scenes in the limestone, and what each formal posture records, the administrative language of the Enochic refusal cross-reference to every known closed palette scene in Old Kingdom relief. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. The Egyptians called him Jehuti. The glyph sequence that renders his name in formal Egyptological notation produces the transliteration Duti from a vowel system no living person has heard. The Greek form Thoth entered usage after Hellenistic scholars began borrowing from the Egyptian tradition in the 3rd century BCE, and the name Hermes Trismegistus came later still, a philosophical overlay that kept the figure while replacing his function. Later traditions turned him into an embodiment of wisdom. The dynastic record is more specific about what that function actually was, and the specificity changes the meaning of every scene in which he appears. In the administrative conventions of the Old Kingdom, Thoth was the keeper of the Medjat, the records. He was not the god of wisdom in the abstract philosophical sense. He was the registrar of what was known, what was permitted to be written, and what was classified as withheld. In the ceremony of the weighing of the heart, Thoth held the pallet and recorded the formal outcome. In the court of the gods, Thoth read the charges from the record. He was not the author of knowledge. He was the authority that determined who had access to it and when access was denied. That distinction between wisdom as a concept and classification as a function is exactly the distinction that matters when you are examining a limestone block that spent 50 years in a museum basement without a single published iconographic study dedicated to what is carved into it. The scene on JE89289 is not a worshipper approaching Thoth in supplication. The carved figures do not hold offering vessels. Their posture and the compositional structure of the register follow the format used in Old Kingdom court relief when a petitioner stands before an official with administrative authority over a specific domain. This is a formal proceeding. Someone came to Thoth not to pray but to petition. What they came to request was access to a category of knowledge that Thoth's administrative role placed under his control. The compound glyph, labeling the central figure in that register, was recorded by the last Egyptologist who examined it, in notes that have never been incorporated into any peer-reviewed publication, as a provisional translation, meaning those who came before the counting of years. In hieroglyphic convention, compound glyphs of that grammatical structure are precise categorical designations. The Egyptians used them to name specific classes of beings and specific offices. This particular compound does not appear in any other cataloged dynastic text. It appears in one other location, on the inner wall of the sealed subsidiary chamber that Lauer's team found beneath the pre-dynastic layer at Sahara in the same 1971 field season, in a chamber his notes describe as predating the step pyramid complex by centuries. not years. Inside that chamber, on the inner wall, the same glyph appears alongside what Lauer described as an interaction scene in a register format inconsistent with any dynastic context he had encountered in 7 decades at the site. That documentation sits in Paris. It has never been the subject of a published study. Both occurrences of that glyph label participants in a scene depicting an exchange that ends without completion. In the JE 89289 register, the figure representing those who came before the counting of years holds a recording palette in the specific upright but closed position that appears in 3 Old Kingdom court relief scenes whose accompanying captions formally record a denial of petition. The closed palette in Egyptian administrative iconography does not mean the official was absent. It means the official heard the petition and filed the denial. The outcome of the proceeding was documented. What was requested was refused. The closed palette was carved into stone, and the stone was sealed inside a chamber beneath the oldest monument complex in the Nile Valley, for somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 years intact. Someone asked Thoth something. The palette was closed. The denial was filed. What was carved was not the question, because what was carved was not a narrative. It was a legal record. Legal records document the outcome. Before we move on to the Enochic petition, stop for a second. What you just heard about the Egyptian administrative scene and what the closed palette meant is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Gaze petition text from the Axum manuscripts. The sealed register, the denied access. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The Book of Enoch was removed from the biblical canon by the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. The stated grounds were that it contained too much specific detail about the fallen angels and their imprisonment. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were recovered at Qumran in 1947, 11 separate copies of the Book of Enoch were among the fragments, more copies than were recovered for Deuteronomy, more than Exodus, more than most books that remained in the final canon. The text was not marginal. It was copied with the frequency of recognized scripture. Its removal was an active administrative decision, not a reflection of its obscurity. The oldest surviving fragments are Aramaic. Fragment 4Q 206 at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem contains material from chapter 17 of Enoch, dated by carbon analysis to approximately 100 BCE. The complete text survives in Ge'ez, in manuscripts held at the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, in Axum, Ethiopia. Those manuscripts have not been available for direct scholarly examination since 1974, when the Ethiopian Revolution reclassified church archives as national cultural property. Dr. James Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame, one of the foremost living authorities on Enoch scholarship, applied for access in 1988 and was denied. He applied again in 1997 and was denied again. In a 2001 interview with Biblical Archaeology Review, Vanderkam stated that at least 3 passages known through secondary references have not been available for direct examination in more than 50 years. Dr. Michael Knibb of Oxford University, whose 1978 translation remains the standard scholarly edition, described the geographical language of chapter 17 as inconsistent with symbolic literature. The text uses compass directions, depth measurements, specific terrain features. At Enoch 17-5, the Ge'ez reads Bahi Abi, the Great Sea, not an allegorical expanse, but a specific body of water named with the precision of an administrative survey. That matters because the formal exchange in chapter 14 follows the same precision. Enoch has been commissioned to carry a petition on behalf of the imprisoned watchers, the fallen angels who descended to Mount Hermon, took human wives, and transmitted unauthorized knowledge to human beings. Their crime, so the text defines it, was not violence. It was teaching, and Enoch 69 specifies what they taught. Penemu transmitted the art of writing itself. Kasdeja transmitted control over biological processes. Gadriel transmitted the principles underlying weapons of death, not specific weapons, but the foundational framework from which an unlimited number could be derived. Each transmitted category was a generative principle, a structural framework from which unlimited applications could be built indefinitely. The petition Enoch carries to the authority at Enoch 14-4 does not ask for the release of the imprisoned watchers. It asks whether the generative knowledge that had passed into the human record could be sealed again, whether the boundary between what human beings were permitted to access and what was held in reserve could be restored to its condition before the descent. The authority's response at Enoch 15-2 is a refusal to address the question. The text records the petition was received, it records the reading was heard, and then it records, In language, the Oxford translation renders as "you shall not have peace," that the matter would not be resolved in the direction requested, not a curse, a procedural outcome. The case was filed, heard, and closed without the relief sought. The pallet was closed. The reason the answer was no is embedded in what the petition was actually asking. Generative knowledge, once in the human record, cannot be removed by reclassification. Reclassifying a principle does not undo the applications already constructed. It does not dismantle the structures already raised. It does not erase the understanding already encoded in every mind that has used the framework to derive something new. To seal the generative knowledge again would require unsealing the world built from it. The world built from it was the world that existed when the petition was filed. The refusal was not moral, it was administrative. The access was requested. The access could not be granted. The pallet was closed. The Septuagint variant of Job enters this investigation through a seam invisible in most translations. The standard Hebrew text of the book of Job contains a passage at Job 38-3 where the divine voice addresses Job from the whirlwind in a sustained speech through 4 chapters. That speech, in the received Masoretic text, is what every modern English translation is based on. But the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures completed at Alexandria around the 3rd century BCE, contains 17 verses in the Job sequence that are not present in the Masoretic text at all. One of these 17 verses contains a passage in which Job asks directly about a domain of knowledge the Greek text identifies as existing before the ordering of days, before time as human beings experience it. The divine response does not answer. The Greek constructs a counter-question that functions not as a redirect but as a formal termination of inquiry. The matter ends. The question is not addressed. And in the Masoretic tradition, both the question and the termination were removed together, so cleanly that the verse following the cut reads without a seam in translation. You cannot see that something is missing unless you have already read the Septuagint and know what to look for. Dr. Emmanuel Tove, principal editor of the Dead Sea Scrolls publication project, noted in a 2004 paper in Textus that the Septuagint variant in the Job sequence warranted dedicated critical comparison. That comparison has not appeared in any peer-reviewed publication in the 2 decades since he identified the need. Job asked about knowledge that preceded the ordering of time. The inquiry was terminated without answer. The Masoretic text removed both the question and the termination from the record. The Babylonian layer arrives from a tablet that technically should not exist. In October 1924, a junior excavator named Tariq Farouk found it 12 feet below the surface of the excavation site and set it on a tray without fully examining it. Leonard Woolley picked it up an hour later and did not set it down for 40 minutes. The script was older than the civilization. The tablet was buried inside, not by decades but by centuries at minimum. Woolley called it the Anzu fragment in his private field notes. The name appears 4 times across 3 seasons of records and then stops. The tablet does not appear in any published catalog. It carries no accession number at the British Museum or the Iraq Museum. A 1924 photograph shows a clay tablet on a linen cloth, partially obscured, with the caption, "Not for reproduction." That photograph is the only confirmed evidence that the object ever existed. A partial translation was completed in 1938 by a linguist at the Oriental Institute in Chicago named Harold Spicer, working from a rubbing received through a channel he never identified. His notes, 18 months of work, survive in the archive there under a folder labeled Miscellaneous Correspondence, a label that ensured they would not be easily found. The folder was discovered in 1987, when a graduate student cataloging unclaimed materials found it misfiled behind a storage cabinet. The most complete reconstruction of the tablet was produced in 2021 by Dr. Nadia Voss at the Free University of Berlin from high-resolution photographs of Spicer's rubbings. Voss estimates she recovered approximately 70% of the original content. The remaining 30% is in the lower third, where the clay was compressed unevenly before firing and cannot be resolved with current imaging. The recovered text is written entirely in past tense, not in the conditional form that all known Sumerian Omen literature uses. The author is not predicting what will happen. The author is describing what already happened to them personally. The text records a formal encounter. After documenting a series of observable changes in the natural world, the author approaches a figure the surviving Sumerian text identifies by a compound. Voss translates as the one who holds the count of what is permitted, not a deity in the conventional Sumerian theological sense. An administrative figure with authority over a specific domain. The author files a formal inquiry using the grammatical structure reserved in every other known Sumerian administrative text for legal petitions. The inquiry asks about access, about whether a specific category of knowledge is within the domain of what the author is permitted to approach. The response occupies the damaged lower third. Voss has not recovered it, but the first legible passage after the gap describes the author's departure. The description uses the same grammatical construction as administrative dismissal in Sumerian legal texts. The inquiry was filed. The inquiry was considered. The inquiry was refused. The author left without what was sought and went to the sealed chamber, applied the clay from the inside, and did not come out. Leonard Woolley noted this in a private journal entry, dated the 14th of October, 1924, not in the institutional field notes but in the personal leather-bound record he kept throughout the excavations. The clay sealing the chamber entrance had been applied from within. There was no exit mechanism. Someone went in, sealed the entrance behind them, placed the tablet on the floor, and remained inside. The same construction detail appears in Lauer's 1971 documentation of the subsidiary chamber at Sahara. Sealed from the inside, no exit. Someone went in and did not come out. Two sealed chambers, two separate civilizations, two separate millennia, both containing records of a formal inquiry to an administrative authority over classified knowledge. Both sealed from inside by someone who understood what they were preserving and understood that what was above them was not a reliable archive. What were all four of them asking? The convergence across the Egyptian relief scene, the Enochic petition, the Septuagint variant of Job, and the Babylonian tablet does not point toward a general category of forbidden knowledge. It points toward a specific structural category, not the physical world that underlies daily experience. The organizational framework from which the observable world is derived. What the Anzu fragment calls An Abzu Bala, sky primordial deep invert. What the Egyptian compound glyph renders as those who came before the counting of years, pointing toward a structure that preceded time. What the Enochic text identifies as the generative frameworks the Watchers transmitted, whose most important property was not any specific piece of information but the capacity to derive unlimited specific pieces from a foundation without being bounded by direct observation. What the Septuagint variant of Job identifies as the knowledge that existed before the ordering of days. The question was whether a human being could access the operational blueprint underlying reality, not its physical manifestations. The organizational structure from which everything visible was derived and from which it is maintained. The structure before the structure. The answer, in all four traditions, was no. And the reason the answer was no is the same in each case, stated differently in each language. Access to the operational blueprint of the world changes the relationship between the one who holds that access and the world they are accessing. A mind with operational access to the blueprint of the structure it inhabits does not operate within that structure the same way a mind without that access operates. The classification was not punitive, it was structural. Granting the access being requested would transform what the petitioner was in relation to everything they were asking about. The knowledge was withheld not because the petitioners were unworthy, but because access to it would make them something other than what they were, and the world they were asking about required them to remain what they were. The Watchers who transmitted generative principles gave human beings a partial and derivative access to that structure. Not the blueprint itself, but the capacity to derive, construct, and extend indefinitely from specific frameworks without additional access to the source. Once those frameworks were in the human record, the relationship between human minds and the underlying structure of the world was permanently altered. The petition asking whether that change could be reversed was refused, not because the petitioners were wrong to ask, but because the world that existed when they asked was a world already built from the change. The administrative authority could not grant an access whose consequence would be to unmake the world in which the petition was being filed. The palette was closed. The outcome was carved, the record was sealed. What survives of those four records is distributed across four institutional locations, none of them in active scholarly communication with each other on this specific matter. JE 89289 is in a catalog drawer in the basement of the Cairo Museum. No dedicated iconographic study has been published in the 50 years since it was removed from public display. The compound glyph element, that has no equivalent in any other hieroglyphic text, the element whose closest cognate in Old Semitic root structures carries the meaning the structure before the structure, has been noted in unpublished correspondence by researchers who encountered the secondary documentation. None of them have published a formal translation of it. Fragment 4Q206 is in Vault 7B at the Israel Museum. The administrative language of the petition at Enoch 14-4, the specific grammatical construction identifying it as a legal filing rather than a devotional appeal, sits in academic publications outside the mainstream conversation about the Book of Enoch. The J's manuscripts in Aksum are behind a restriction that has stood for more than 50 years. At least 3 passages known through secondary references have not been available for direct examination since before the restriction took effect. The Codex Vaticanus in Rome preserves the 17 Septuagint verses absent from the Masoretic Job. The dedicated critical comparison Dr. Tove identified as necessary in 2004 has not appeared in any journal in the 20 years since. The Anzu fragment carries no location. No public collection accounts for it. Dr. Voss's 2022 working paper reconstructing 70% of its content has been read by 11 scholars. None of them have published a response. The chambers that originally held 3 of these 4 records were sealed from the inside by people who became part of the archive rather than leave it to the surface world. Whatever they understood about what they were preserving, it was sufficient reason to entomb themselves with it. The limestone is still in the catalog drawer. The Aramaic is still under glass. The gaze is still behind the church door in Axum. The tablet is still unaccounted for. The 17 verses are still in the Codex Vaticanus, available to any scholar who looks, next to the question that was formally terminated and the answer that was never given. And the underlying architecture of what exists, the structure before the structure, the thing they were all asking about across 4 traditions and 4 millennia, remains exactly as classified as it was in the administrative proceeding, carved into limestone and buried beneath the oldest stone complex on Earth. The question was heard. The question was refused. The pallet was closed. The clay was sealed. The records were distributed across traditions that would never meet each other, preserved in materials that have held for 4,000 years, without the record of the refusal ever being formally acknowledged in a published study connecting all 4 of them. The classification is still in effect. The petition was denied. And what was asked about? The structure that underlies the structure? The organizational framework that the petitioners across 4 traditions reached toward and were refused? Remains precisely where Thoth left it when the pallet closed.